even exist? And how do we even measure inequality? So maybe the first thing we could look at is actually, what is inequality and how do we measure it? I'm sure you guys all know that inequality is just the difference. There's many ways to measure it, but same thing with sort of GDP is we use a very sort of brute, crude way of measuring it, and it's just to do with income. Is the main way, and it's called the Gini coefficient, and we'll look at that in a sec. So we're going to be using the Gini coefficient, and that is how we measure it, and this takes into account the distribution of income within a country or within a continent or the world. So now the question I want to ask is, do we think inequality is growing, and at what kind of rate and distribution? Would anybody like to give this a go?
Yeah, so I think inequality is growing. I haven't looked at any statistics, but just like judging by my experience and like what I know already, I would say that since prices keep rising because everyone is getting wealthier, so there's more need for services, but there's also like less jobs available, especially now with the coronavirus crisis. So I would definitely say that the people who started off like in the middle classes and the higher classes, they would be benefiting more from this. But the people, it's getting harder to breach the gap for the people who are lower classes and not as privileged in society as the others.
Yeah, excellent. That's a good answer. And I want to pick, you said like bridging the gap, and that's what we want to look at, is that there is a huge gap between the rich and the poor, and it just keeps getting bigger. So we want to look at, why is the rich getting richer, and is the poorer getting poorer? Are the poor getting poorer? Excellent. So just to, we'll look at some graphs. Everyone loves graphs. So on the left, you'll see global inequality as a Gini coefficient. And you can see from the 1820s, it's gradually grown. And when we enter the 2000s, it's actually beginning to level out. And we can have a discussion as to why that is. Then on the right-hand side, on this graph, we've got the top 1% income share. And we're looking at mainly European countries and the US. Can someone have a go at describing how the pattern of this graph? What's going on here, and at what kind of times, and how is this graph changing over time? Sasha, would you like to give this a go?
I'm thinking. A minute.
Just to describe the graph, what are we looking at on the right-hand side?
If we look, we can see that the Sweden is on the first place. Then is going
is it going up in the last sort of 20 years?
The Sweden is on the first place, then is going USA, Britain, and French.
Yeah. So Sweden has, so we're going to use the top, how much wealth the top 1% owns as an indicator as inequality. They're not quite the same, but it gives us a good equivalent. So as we can see, from the 1900s up till the 2000s, income of the top 10% actually went down a bit. Then we had World War II in 1945, and then it flattened. It flattened for about, and even went down a bit, up till the 1980s. Who knows what was going on after World War II to the 1980s?
So just a guess, because like after World War II, there were like a lot of casualties during the war. So then I'm guessing after, like, the countries, for example, Germany had to pay like money to the other countries because like it started the war and there were like agreements and things for it to pay back the money. And then the other countries, they were probably fixing buildings and roads and hospitals and things. So I'm guessing the 1% income share decreased because there wasn't that much money available in the first place.
That's a good point, and I think that definitely comes into it. The main thing was actually comes into you're right, they had to rebuild the nation. But actually everyone realized that you needed a lot of people, and you could say the World War II brought some nations together. And this sort of built a more socialist mindset that you have to support your people to either get through a war and now to exist afterwards. So for instance, in Britain, after World War II was when our National Health Service was created. It's when we said that we need to have a welfare state where we support all our citizens, no matter their wealth. So yeah, we have our NHS, which means you have access to free healthcare. And it's so between sort of post World War II to the 1980s was a relatively socialist time. It wasn't, so not so capitalist. And we'll go in later what we mean by the differences between socialism and capitalism. So if the graph sort of flattened when it was a more socialist time, and then post 1980s till now, what do we think happened to cause it to grow? What changed? So what happened is we had like the new neoliberal era. So do people recognize the names Ronald Reagan and Thatcher? Thatcher was the UK Prime Minister, Ronald Reagan was the US President, and they basically brought in a new, like, capitalism on steroids. And it was all about deregulation of markets, trying to create the free markets, trying to take away from the welfare state. In the UK, for instance, we had lots of public housing where you could get quite low rents and from the council. And with Thatcher, she said you can buy these houses. And so now we have a very, very small amount of public housing for people. So it's very hard to get low rent. So we see this growth in inequality, or the growth in the amount of the top 1% has, because we had a new wave of capitalism, and it was a global, and this did become a global wave as well. And as Sasha said, the US has one of the highest rates, or the top 1% has the greatest income share compared to the other ones. And the US is like another level of capitalism, Okay, excellent. Now, so just to give you some more facts, have a read of these. Just give you a better idea of what we're talking about. So by 2030, the richest 1% will own 2/3 of global wealth. So that's crazy. 1%, if you're in the 1%, you would say sort of middle class in Europe, in like Western Europe countries like Britain, France, Germany, same thing in the US. That if you're middle class in those countries, you're about the top 1%. So what we're seeing is a concentration of wealth in the few, and that is the trajectory. Next bullet point, 26 of the richest people in the world own as much wealth as the bottom half of the world's population put together. So now we're not even looking at 1% of the population, we're looking at 26 individuals. So what we're seeing is wealth isn't just concentrated in certain countries, i.e. maybe Europe or US or now China, but actually it's also concentrated in a few people. And as you can guess, that these people are the ones that own huge, huge companies. Then the third one is that the wealth of the 2,000 billionaires has grown by 12% between 2017 and 2018. But the wealth or the bottom half of humanity between the same time period fell by 11%. So the rich are getting richer, the particularly wealthy are getting particularly wealthier, and the poor are getting poorer. So now I want to think about why this is. There are lots of theories. We don't have too much time today, but I just wanted to go through, I think, some main thinkers in this. I'm sure as no one would be surprised that we're getting up Marx. Karl Marx, big name. Can anyone tell me what he is famous for?
He has a book, I can't remember what it's called, but he has a book on capitalism and communism, I think it covers.
So he wrote the Communist Manifesto, which is sort of laying out a groundwork of it's a critique of capitalism, and sort of, and then talks about an alternative, and then Das Kapital. So when we think of Marx, think of him first as someone who critiqued capitalism rather than immediately a communist. Because often people dismiss Marx as someone, oh, who's just a radical communist. Actually, he did really excellent sustained critiques of capitalism. And from that, he thought then there must be an alternative. And that for him was communism. So we're going to take some of his theories to try and understand better why inequality exists and whether it's inevitable within a capitalist system. So if people aren't aware, if anyone has any questions, please stop me and we can go back through it. So what I want to borrow from his theory is his distinction between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. He's known, so the bourgeoisie, think of them as the richer people, they're the capitalists, the ruling class, and the proletariat are the workers. They tend to be poorer. And the bourgeoisie, what makes them the bourgeoisie, what makes them wealthy, is that they own the means of production. They own capital. Now, what we mean, does anyone here know what I mean by means of production? It's a new term.
May
Go for it, Sasha.
so
Who are the bourgeoisie? And what is the means of production? Would you like to give it a go, Sasha? Or you can try another question later. Cool, okay. So means of production, very much a term we think of as a coined by Marx, and it basically means everything you need to produce a product. We're thinking raw materials, machinery, factory, land, and capital. What I mean by capital is just money. You need to invest in a factory before you can profit from what it makes. So the bourgeoisie had the original money to then invest in a factory. Yes, so the bourgeoisie are those that own the means of production. We're thinking of them as the factory owners in a more crude sense. So the proletariat then are the people that all they have to sell is their labor. So if we're thinking of in a warehouse, they're the people on the warehouse floor, the ones driving the truck lifts, and they sell their labor at a fixed cost now per hour. And it tends to be the bourgeoisie that sets that cost unless there's government regulation. So the proletariat are the workers on the factory floor, and the bourgeoisie are the owners of the factory. So the proletariat, they have a fixed income. Whereas the bourgeoisie, they have whatever profit the company makes, and this could be huge. So their money isn't capped. And so what Marx argued was that the bourgeoisie within a capitalist system exploits the proletariat in pursuit of money. in pursuit of profit. And then this creates a conflict between these two classes. So the proletariat, the amount of wealth they can accrue is capped, and it's capped not much higher than this isn't, say, minimum wage, for instance, in the UK. That you might be able to just live off that. So all the money all your salary goes to consumption. And what I mean by consumption is your rent, your food, your transport, your education. You don't have any savings to invest by putting it in a bank. And if you put £100 in a bank, leave it for 10 years, you might take it out and have £200, because the bank gives you money for leaving it with them. So, but if you just use your money for consumption, you don't have any more wealth. So for the proletariat, their wealth is capped, whereas for the bourgeoisie, they can make profits, and we're talking huge amounts of profit. So who can tell me who this gentleman on the left is? Wait for my slide to catch up.
He's the first century billionaire.
And yeah, absolutely. And do you know his name or how he gets his money?
No, I don't know his name, unfortunately.
This is
Anybody else recognize?
but does he on Amazon, or am I like confusing him with someone?
Yeah, this is the owner of Amazon. Do you remember his name?
No.
So this is Jeff Bezos. He very recently became the first billionaire in the world. So that means he's the first person to be valued at over $100 billion. And yeah, he runs Amazon. So let's say Jeff Bezos is the bourgeoisie. He owns the means of production, and any profit that Amazon makes, and profit is the difference between what they sell their products for and the amount it costs them to make it. It goes to him. Whereas, so that is almost, you could call it infinite possibility of money he can make. Whereas the factory owners in his warehouse own a fixed amount of money of $15 per hour. So going back to the original thing we saw was that wealth is becoming more concentrated in certain individuals. It's not just country specific. So for instance, in the USA, you have huge amounts of poverty, huge amount of income inequality. Even though the USA is supposedly one of the richest countries in the world, there's a lot of inequality in there. And the reason it has so many billionaires is that lots of companies have their headquarters in the USA, and now increasingly China as well. So Amazon have their headquarters, I think, the US. So you have a few individuals that hold an obscene amount of wealth. So I'm always challenging you guys to get out of imagining it as like certain countries are rich and certain countries are poor, but actually increasingly certain people are rich and everyone else is less well off. Yeah, so that's what I want to do. So then if we think about, I've explained the difference between capital and labor. So therefore we can begin to think about our definition of capitalism. And here I think is quite a good one. It's defined as private ownership and control over the means of the production. So the ability to own the means of production, the ability to be a factory owner. And where the surplus product, the profits, becomes a source of unearned income for its owners. So the factory owners that sell their product for a higher amount it takes for them to make it, we could call it unearned income, because they aren't physically using their bodies or their brains to physically make a product. They're actually just selling an inflated difference, you could say. Whereas socialism which Marx was a contender for, and communism, is defined as social ownership of the means of production. So the surplus product accrues to society at the large. So no one owns the factory, but perhaps the government would own it. And any profit that that factory makes gets redistributed. So that's where we're at. If you look at this picture on the left, it's quite an iconic photo, really old one. And this is almost just showing like quite an understanding of it. So we rule you, the government, we fool you, the clergy and religion, we shoot you, military control over people, we eat for you, thinking of sort of the bourgeoisie and how they live their lives, and then we feed all of you. So to reiterate, this is Marx's quite damning critique of capitalism. You know, lots of people are opponents of it as well. Lots of good can come from capitalism. It's just an economic and political system. So then where does, Polina, go for it.
Yeah, so just a question. Who is the author of the drawing or illustration or like the poster?
That is a good question. It says by Needle, Jovic, Bashik, and Kuharich, but I don't know who they are.
Okay.
All I know is quite an iconic poster. That's a good question. It'd be good to know. So then, yeah, to sum up, then inequality comes from the difference between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. Sasha, go for it.
In the picture, we can see that in the lowest part, there are a lot of people, who are just working, but if they won't leave, we can't image our life without them, because they are doing a lot important things for us.
So you're saying that we need the bottom bit that says we feed all of you. We need all those people.
Yes, yes.
Is that what you're saying? Yes, absolutely. These are the people who are actually making products, who are actually farming the land. And then the people above them are just people that control them and then increase the price of the product and perhaps even sell it back to them. So for instance, if you work in a factory that sells copper cups, you get a fixed wage per hour, and then you go home and you need a copper cup and you go buy one from the exact same factory. You're going to pay a higher price for that cup, and actually be giving some sort of profit back to the factory owner. So yes, the people at the bottom are fundamental to the whole system. And what Marx said was that these people are being exploited by the capitalist system. They are not giving a proper wage for their work, or some people say even wage labor is slavery. Everyone should be able to own their own means of production. These are more radical ideas. But yes, people at the bottom are arguably the most important. So then the big question is it inevitable? Is inequality inevitable in a capitalist system? What do you guys think?
I think yes. I think we can control the gap between the wealthier people and the poorer people, but I do think there is going to be a gap. I think it's going to be impossible to eradicate the gap completely, because there will be people who has a lot of money and people who don't have a lot of money, and because like if everyone had a lot of money, then what would the value of money even be? So I think while we can control the gap and kind of attempt to make it smaller by helping the people who struggle more, so providing education and health services and things like that, I don't think it's possible to just like not have the gap at all, because there will always be people who has more and people who has less. So I think inequality is inevitable.
Excellent. Yeah, good answer. Arena, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I think that a capitalist system is built by people, and all people have different personalities and different needs. Yes, we all have needs which are connected with our physical condition, but different people want also need wealth, and they want to be leaders in our world, and so they control other people, and this leads to inequality, and this is inevitable process, I think, and we can't live without this inequality, because our system won't exist.
Okay. So similar thoughts to you two. It's inevitable, but we can do things about them. Excellent. Sasha?
So I think the same as Arina.
Do you want to expand on that? What about
What?
it?
There are some problems. I can't hear you well.
What exactly do you agree with Arena on? Okay. Yeah, so what Marx would say that inequality is almost a function of capitalism. It's completely inevitable. But I'd like to go back to what you said, Polina. Oh, sorry, chat's just popped up. Oh, Sasha, no sound. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'll just respond to him so he can. Okay, so I want to next talk about something that Polina mentioned, is perhaps there's things we can do about inequality, even if it's inevitable, some amount. What kind of things can we do to reduce it? So, Polina, could you just tell me a little bit more about what you think the ways are that we can reduce inequality in a capitalist system?
Yeah, but before I do that, could I just ask, like, this chat is about to collapse, so should we just click on the link again?
Yes, when it turns off, just click on the exact same link.
Okay. So I think that there's things that the rich perhaps can do. Maybe they can like donate to charities and things like that. But the problem is also like getting the rich people to part with